You look at the world today and it just feels chaotic, right? But what if I told you none of this is new? What if it's all part of a predictable cycle that's been repeating for centuries? In this explainer, we're going to break down Ray Dalio's incredible framework for understanding these massive historical shifts, how they're likely to impact your wealth, and what you can actually do about it. And this quote from Dalio, it's really the key to everything. He's not just making an observation here. This is both a warning and a roadmap. His core message is that while the specifics change, the technology, the politicians, the deep underlying forces that drive history, they're timeless. So to get ready for the future, we absolutely have to understand the patterns of the past. So what's making today so radically different? Well, according to Dalio, it's not just one thing. It's the convergence of three massive forces, all hitting at the same time, creating a situation most of us have never, ever seen. He calls it a dangerous cocktail. Let's break down the ingredients. First, you've got governments with just massive amounts of debt and interest rates near zero. This means their usual toolbox for fighting a crisis is basically empty. Second, you have huge internal conflict, driven by these massive wealth gaps we see everywhere. And third, you've got the big one, the external conflict of a rising power, China, challenging the current top dog, the US. Any one of these is a big deal on its own. All three together, that's a perfect storm. And this is where it gets really serious. Dalio draws a direct line from today back to the 1930-1945 period. Think about that for a second. A global depression and a world war. Now, he's not saying history is going to repeat exactly, but he is saying that the underlying mechanics, the forces at play, are the same. We are living through a period of intense global restructuring. This is not business as usual. So if we're sailing into this kind of historical storm, how on earth do we navigate it? Well, this brings us to Dalio's core idea for making sense of it all, the big cycle. And that's the key question, isn't it? Are we just passengers on some chaotic, unpredictable ride with no map? Or are there actual patterns here that we can recognize and use to prepare ourselves? Dalio's answer is that it is absolutely a pattern. His whole approach is to look at current events and see them as another one of those. It's kind of like an experienced doctor who's seen 1,000 cases of the flu. They recognize the symptoms immediately. Dalio does the same thing, but with hundreds of years of history. It helps you get above the daily noise, the blizzard of headlines, and see the long-term weather pattern. Okay, this chart right here is the heart of the big cycle. Don't worry about all the little details. Just focus on the big picture. Each of those colored lines represents the rise and fall of a major empire, the Dutch, the British, and the US. See how they overlap? The really crucial part is those gray shaded areas. That's when one empire is in decline and another one is rising up to challenge it. And those transition periods are almost always marked by debt crises, internal revolutions, and very often war. This is where we are today. So let's zoom in on what typically happens during those dangerous transition periods. It's like it follows a script. First, the financial system starts to crack under the weight of all that debt. Then, you see internal conflict explode over wealth and power. That often spills over into an external war between the rising and the falling empires. And, critically for every single investor, the value of money itself comes into question as currencies break down. It's only after all of this that a new world order finally emerges. Now, of all those factors, there's one that directly hits every single person's savings and investments: the devaluation of money. So let's break down why this is right at the heart of this cycle. To really get the risk here, we first have to understand what our money actually is. Most of us use what's called fiat money. In the past, a dollar was basically a claim check for a physical thing, like gold. But today, a dollar, a euro, a yen, it has value simply because the government says it does. Its entire value is based on just one thing: our trust in that government. And, well, trust can be broken. And that trust gets tested in a very predictable cycle. It usually starts with a stable system backed by something real, like gold. Then governments start issuing more paper IOUs than they have gold, which lets debt just grow and grow. Eventually, a debt crisis hits, and to solve it, they break the link to gold entirely and create pure fiat money. This lets them print even more, which of course eventually devalues the currency and sends people running for safety in hard assets all over again. If you take away only one image from this whole explainer, make it this one. This chart shows the value of the world's most dominant currencies over the last 400 years, all measured against gold. The Dutch guilder, the British pound, the US dollar. Just look at the long-term trend. Every single one eventually gets devalued and trends towards zero. Why? Because when the debt gets too high, governments always choose to print more money. This isn't a flaw in the system, it's how the system is designed. So the really crucial point is this: there are no exceptions in history. Every single fiat currency has eventually been devalued or has disappeared completely. That's a pretty sobering thought for anyone trying to save for the future in any single currency. And why does this happen over and over again? Well, because when a government is drowning in debt, the other options, like jacking up taxes or slashing spending, are politically painful. Printing more money is always the path of least resistance. It feels good in the short term, but it systematically erodes savings of everyone who holds that currency.
Okay, so that's the historical diagnosis, and I know it sounds pretty grim, but Dalio's framework isn't about fear, it's about preparation. Understanding the pattern is the first step to navigating it successfully. So let's get into the practical takeaways for actually protecting your wealth.
Dalio uses this really powerful analogy for a reason. Bonds and other assets that are basically just a promise to be paid back in currency, they become incredibly risky when that very currency is being devalued. So what looks like a super safe investment can actually become a huge liability. This slide shows the fundamental mental shift you have to make to navigate the end of a big cycle. The assets we're always taught are safe, cash and bonds. They become the absolute riskiest things to own because they're guaranteed to lose purchasing power when the money printing starts. On the flip side, what many people think of as risky, like gold or assets in other countries, they actually become the safe hedges. The key is to own things that can't be easily printed, and to diversify your wealth across different currencies and countries, not just different stocks. So it all boils down to these three timeless principles. First, you have to understand your currency risk. Stop thinking only about whether your stocks are up or down. Start thinking about whether your actual currency is holding its value. Second, you have to get brutally honest about your financial safety margin. How long could you really last if your income stopped and your assets took a nosedive? And third, the oldest rule in the book: diversify. But diversify in a way that truly protects you from these big cycles we've been talking about. And this brings us full circle, right back to today. This chart shows our current position in the big cycle. You can clearly see the United States, the dominant power, is past its peak and in what Dalio calls relative decline. And right behind it, that red line of China is rising at an incredible rate. Look where we are right now. We are living inside one of those gray, shaded areas of transition we talked about. This is not a theoretical exercise. This is our reality. So the ultimate question this historical perspective forces us all to ask is a personal one. The great cycles of history are going to continue to turn regardless of what any of us do. The only thing we can control is how we prepare. So is your portfolio built for the world we've lived in, or is it ready for the one that's coming?